Okay, so getting back into our coverage of post-Operation Zero Tolerance, I'm going to go ahead and add this video to the Operation Zero Tolerance playlist. And the reason why, because it kind of does answer the question of like, okay, where were these characters that weren't really part of Operation Zero Tolerance? Because let me explain. As we all know, you had Bastion just go bonkers. So you know what? Let's go ahead and attack all the different mutants across the world, but especially all the different X family, X-Men, X-Force, Generation X, not Excalibur and not X-Factor. But anyways, you had him just go after all these different X characters. But the thing was, like, by the end of that event, you had S.H.I.E.L.D. go out of their way to stop Bastion because you had the American government realize it was a huge mistake allowing this man to do whatever he wanted in their country and going after innocent people who are just trying to live normal lives, even if they are mutants or not. Now, with all that being said, when it came to the Uncanny X-Men book, you only had one chapter that was technically part of that event, and that was Spider-Man going up against Marrow. Now, when it came to the other X characters we saw prior to the actual crossover, Beast, Gambit, Rogue, Joseph, they were all away in space. Now, I'm not going to sit down and try to re-explain the whole idea of that storyline because technically that storyline is not really important for this one. Like, the last few pieces of that storyline truly is. And let me explain, because when it came to our heroes, you had our heroes just help out the Shi'ar Empire, right? And after doing that, you had those characters trying to travel back to Earth. That was their main goal. The problem was that they were confronted by this massive spaceship that kind of did damage to their spaceship on their way back home. And so we were kind of left to wonder, like, what happened to those characters? And for a quick moment in the middle of Operation Zero Tolerance, we saw that for Gambit, he was being attacked by some creature, and that was it. But then this storyline kind of says, actually, those characters were on Earth the entire time when it came to Operation Zero Tolerance. But why those characters were not involved in the actual crossover? And so that is why, as you dive into the opening pages for Uncanny X-Men issue number 347, you're really picking up with the idea right now of Gambit realizing that when he hinted their spacecraft, they didn't crash on some alien planet, they crashed back on Earth. And the reason why he knows that, because he runs into characters who used to be close friends of his, better known as, and guys, these names for me, I have no idea why I found them funny, but their names are Spat and Grovel. Now, for these two characters, like I said, they were close friends of Gambit in the past, but apparently Gambit did something to them, and so now they're technically were hired to go after Gambit. They're bounty hunters. And so for Gambit, he realized, okay, I'm no longer in space. I'm back on Earth, but he's not involved with Operation Zero Tolerance. Now, that actual crossover will come up here in a brief moment, but we have to switch over to Beast and also Trish Tilby. Now remember, when it comes to Beast and Trish, they have this very strong relationship in the 1990s. Unfortunately, by the 2000s, she's almost completely forgotten. But she is this reporter who unfortunately got brought into the last adventure for the X-Men. And so right now, they're kind of wondering like where they are. They don't realize at first right now that they're back on Earth. But while you have Beast trying to retell us what went down in the last storyline for our heroes, you didn't have Beast just out of nowhere passes out. It's so now up to Trish to watch over him until he's able to recover. Now, I kind of want to go ahead and shift over to Marrow and also Callisto. And here's the reason why. Because in Uncanny X-Men issue number 346, they were in the actual crossover for Operation Zero Tolerance. As a matter of fact, it was Spider-Man going up against Marrow. Now, with all that being said, Callisto got injured in that storyline. And so for Marrow, she hated the idea that Callisto got injured. Here's the problem though, because in the rest of our coverage or the crossover, Marrow just reappeared, teamed up with Iceman and also Dr. Reyes and helped them hunt down Bastion and, well, his mother actually. And so even though that was a cool storyline, we were kind of left to wonder, hey, what happened to Callisto? And why in the world did Marrow just rejoin the crossover? This part right here answers that question because this issue does take place at the same exact time as Operation Zero Tolerance. It's just that it's not part of the actual event, because for Callisto, it's her wanting Marrow to take over a new leaf, to turn to a different road, a different path to take for her life. But unfortunately for Marrow, she wants revenge against the humans, and so she leaves. Now, we already know where she goes. We saw her at the end of Operation Zero Tolerance. Now, I want to shift over to Rogue and also, well, Magneto, but Joseph. Now, here's the thing about these characters, because for these two, they were also part of that space adventure and just trying to get back over to Earth. They crash on Earth, but they don't know they're back on Earth at the moment. Now, for Joseph, we also have to remember two things. First, this dude does not remember that he was apparently Magneto in the past life, #1 bad guy for the X-Men. But also, #2, him and Rogue got a thing going. But at the same time, Rogue is also in love with, well, Gambit as well. Homegirl is stuck in the middle. This right here was the new 1990s love triangle, because for me personally, you had a lot of those. For example, Cyclops, Madeline Pryor, Jean Grey, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Psylocke. Man, Cyclops, you had some issues. Anyways, but when it comes to these two characters, they wake up and realize, okay, we have no idea where we are. But for Rogue, she also realized she's not able to fly far away. Like there's some kind of force field around them. Now, you do have Magneto use his powers, and when he does, he shuts down the person who was creating that force field. Really, this whole environment is holographic, because there's a character known as Landscape who has the ability to create these fake environments around you to make you believe you're somewhere else, but in reality, you're not there. And so once you have Magneto use his powers in this area and shut down Landscape, it also helps out Gambit as well. Because now he knows, okay, it's not just 2 bounty hunters, it's 3 of them, but it seems like one of them just got taken out most likely. Now, we also learned for these bounty hunters, they're very upset about the idea that Gambit did work for somebody known as him. Now, we already know who him is. It has to be, well, good old Mr. Sinister, because in the earlier parts of our coverage over this event, or the X-Men, sorry, not this event, over the X-Men, we had learned that in the past, those two characters did something together. And we also have to remember that when it came to Rogue, she had kissed Gambit right after, oh my God, what was it called? It was an X-Men event that took place prior to Age of Apocalypse. And it's going to bother me because it was a crazy, crazy storyline. What was it called? That's right, it was Legion Quest. Anyways, when it came to Legion Quest, you had Rogue and also Gambit kiss. Now, while they were kissing, the universe did technically die and led into Age of Apocalypse. But when the reality came back to life, that kiss still happened and allowed Rogue to remember, oh, really die in the mind of Gambit. And so with her going into his mind, she realized that, okay, he did something in the past. Now, while you have all this going on, oh my God, there's so much happening, but you also have another plot line going on, and that'll be a character known as Maggot. Now, for Maggot, he's on the hunt right now for Joseph, and technically right now, we have no idea why, but we're going to learn over time. But for Maggot, he's in South Carolina, and with the idea of Operation Zero Tolerance going off at the moment, you do have some locals right now going after him, but of course, for good old Maggot, he was able to deal with those locals very easily. But this kind of leads into the ending of the first chapter of this storyline. Yeah, guys, this right here was just the ending of the first chapter. But you do have Gambit, Rogue, and also Magneto being able to regroup alongside with all the bounty hunters. Now, for Beast and Trish, they're not there just yet. But with everyone being able to regroup, and you didn't have Rogue realize that for Gambit, he's not going to allow these bounty hunters to take him away so easily. You didn't have Magneto be confronted by something, really someone, we have not seen in a very long time. And I mean like the early days of Chris Claremont. And that would be the Nanny. Now, the Nanny has been around for a very long time, and if I remember correctly, she was created by Chris Claremont for like a brief, quick story. Let me explain. So there was this storyline before Chris Claremont, if I remember correctly, where when it came to Magneto, he was turned into a baby. Yeah, you heard that right. Magneto was turned into a baby, but he was then be taken care of by Moira McTaggart. Now, that whole plot line right there led into another problem when it came to Magneto and more. But anyways, when it came to Magneto, he was aged back up again, but when it came to Marvel, they kind of did that in a way to make Magneto younger, but it also make him stronger and also a bigger threat towards the X-Men. Now, once you have Magneto grow up, you then have Magneto go after the X-Men, capture them, made them hostages, and technically did treat them like they were babies as well, and you had the Nanny take care of them. Now, the X-Men were able to escape, and really, when that base was supposedly destroyed, we were kind of left to believe in the possibility that the Nanny was gone forever. Here's the thing, she's not gone, she's still alive, but also the Nanny, this robot, when it came to her in that prior storyline, she was able to cancel out mutant powers by making mutants wear these collars that cancel out their powers. But now it seems like she does not even need the collars anymore, because while you do have Magneto wanting to fight against her and all these old creations he made in the past, for the Nanny, she was able to shut down all the different powers of every single person in that cave. Now, we have to switch over to Bishop and Deathbird. Now, I had mentioned this in an earlier storyline because when it came to Deathbird, right, she had a crush on Bishop. Once she realized what kind of guy he was to her, she wanted to be with him. Now, for the rest of the X-Men, they all crashed on Earth. Deathbird and Bishop did not. And you have Deathbird right now trying to heal up Bishop, but while he's trying to recover, it's Deathbird telling Bishop like, hey, everyone else died. Like, you are now the sole survivor of your people. But don't worry, you and I are going to rule an empire together. And I'm kind of like, wait, I think she knows the X-Men did not die, but it's also us finding out that at the very last second, her and Bishop teleported away, but really more Deathbird grabbed Bishop and teleported away. Now, go ahead and getting back over to Rogue and Gambit. This is really important because for Rogue and Gambit, they're with the bounty hunters at the moment. Now, the bounty hunters are kind of wondering like, can Gambit get them free? He says no for right now, but I want to shift over to Rogue. Here's the reason why, because for Rogue, over the years in Marvel Comics, she had touched many people. When she does, she absorbed their personalities, their personas, but also their memories as well. Here's the thing, because over time, we have seen this a lot where one of the personas of someone she touched in the past is then able to take over her body. Like, for example, she touched Carol Danvers a very long time ago, but there was this plot line where Carol Danvers was, or a persona of Carol Danvers was able to take over Rogue's body and technically be her, but in the body of Rogue. And so right now we see that there's someone or something trying to take over Rogue's body. But let's not forget, Rogue did look in the mind of Gambit before when she had kissed him. The thing was, she had no idea how to guide herself through what she saw in Gambit's mind. And so right now, what she saw is now beginning to pop back up in her mind again. And she's kind of wondering like, what did Gambit do? Like, can he actually guide her to the answers of what she saw in his mind? Now, I want to go ahead and shift over to Magneto and also the Nanny, because for the Nanny, her main goal is to protect Magneto. Here's the reason why. Because of Operation Zero Tolerance. Because for the whole idea that right now you have all these different mutants at this time being attacked by Bastion, is her saying like, hey, I gotta protect you. I gotta watch over you. I gotta make sure that you are okay and everything. But it's Magneto now finding out about Operation Zero Tolerance. And for me personally, This is kind of like the starting point where it's going to be Joseph going back into the role of Magneto, because now he's seeing that different mutants, his people, are once again being attacked across the entire nation by one man. And technically, the American government at first allowed Bastion to go ahead and do it. Now, we do switch over to Psylocke and also Archangel. Now, for these two characters, they were not part of Operation Zero Tolerance. And matter of fact, they were part of a whole different storyline called Crimson Dawn. Now, unfortunately, and I really did want to cover it, it's not out there for me to really buy or even like for me to download. And so when it came to the Crimson Dawn storyline, it removed those two characters from the whole idea of Operation Zero Tolerance. Now, in that crossover, you had Iceman stop by Archangel's home, and of course he was attacked there. And so for these two characters, when they arrive at his house, Archangel's home, they're kind of like, yeah, Bobby was here, but it does seem like he was attacked. But for Archangel, when he turns around, Psylocke is gone. I kind of want to go ahead and switch over to Beast, because when it comes to Beast, it's him waking back up, but also realizing two things. One, Trish is not there. But two, also the fact that like where they could possibly be at, because for Beast, he was with the X-Men when it came to the earlier X-Men team that was taken by Magneto back in that storyline where he was turned back into an adult again and everything. But either way, for Beast, he now knows they got to get the heck out of here now. Now, for the ending of this chapter, we do jump back over to Gambit and, well, the bounty hunters. Now, for Gambit, he wants to know, like, who hired them? Why are they there? Now, you have one of them inform Gambit, like, listen, you know why we're here for. Like, you did some horrible things in the past, but also because especially you went to work for him. But it's also them pointing out the fact that, like, hey, listen, you understand that we had to come after you. But the thing is, you'll be surprised in who had hired us. Now, we don't get the chance to know who it is because you didn't have Gambit shift his focus back on Rogue. Because with their powers now being canceled, that allows Gambit to be able to really get close to Rogue, to actually be with her, to touch her and everything. But at the same time for Rogue, even though she now has the ability to do that, for Rogue, she wants to know what's going on in her mind because, again, she saw into the mind of Gambit. She saw some dark things about him, and she needs his help to understand what she saw. Now, as we jump over to issue number 349, you still have Maggot right now just on the hunt for Joseph, and he believes that there is a possibility that he's right now getting closer and closer and closer to finding the man that he's currently looking for. But now we have to shift over to Uncanny X-Men issue number 349. Now, when we do, we're picking up with Trish Tilby. And for Trish, it's her kind of like informing us what happened in the first two chapters, but we already know what happened. But it's also her running into Beast. Now, we saw this coming because when it came to Beast, it was kind of him realizing where they were at, but also the idea that if everyone else's powers got canceled, that would mean the same thing for Beast as well. And so for Trish, for the first time in a very long time, is her being able to see Beast, what he looks like with his blue fur on at the moment. But at the same time, his other abilities have also been canceled out as well. Now, while you have all that going on, the rest of our heroes are technically still prisoners at the moment. And for Rogue, she still wants some information from Gambit, but it's Gambit once again pulling away, not really trying to guide Rogue like he should when it comes to his secrets, because sooner or later, they're gonna come out. And when they do, there's a possibility it could shatter Rogue and shatter their relationship. And so you do have Rogue just wants information from Gambit, but he walks away. Now you also have Spat come over and say, hey, Rogue, talk to me, one of the bounty hunters. She's kind of like, listen, I want to talk to you about what you're currently seeing because you're only seeing small moments of what you saw in his mind. Let me begin to figure out what you saw as a way to help you. But while you have our heroes currently prisoners at the moment, getting back over to Maggot is him still trying his best to locate Joseph, right? But then he runs into Psylocke. this is why she disappeared earlier, because for Psylocke, she sensed some darkness from his mind and kind of realized she had to go after him. And so at the moment right now, it's her wanting to fight against him. Now, while you have the two fighting in the middle of the city, you also have Archangel realize where the possibility his girlfriend is at the moment. And so when he does arrive, what he's seeing at the moment is just Psylocke fighting against Maggot. And really at first, it's a pretty even match. And really, you don't have Archangel getting involved that much in the battle, or most likely at all. But when it comes to the very end of the battle, Psylocke does win, right? Now, for Psylocke, is her also implying again that what she sensed from Maggot is pure darkness. Like, she's kind of wondering more about this character. And for Archangel, he's kind of like, girl, listen, we already got a lot on our plate at the moment. Operation Zero Tolerance, Iceman is missing, the X-Men are in space. Well, not really, but for them, they're like, yeah, they're in space. They're kind of like, girl, what else do we have on our plate at the moment? And that's the thing, because we still have no idea who this guy is yet. But we're not even getting that part right there just yet, because as we do switch over to the heroes who were captured by the Nanny, we're entering the big 350, right? And so with the big 350 coming around, you basically had our heroes being able to escape from the prison thanks to Magneto and also Gambit as well, because the dude already knew how to pick the locks. Now, with all that being said, they run into the Nanny. Now, luckily for our heroes, Trish was there and she knocked the head off the Nanny's robot, or Nanny's body, sorry. Now, with her head being gone, it allowed our heroes to once again have their powers back. But this leads into another problem. What is this big secret that Gambit is currently holding on to at the moment? And so it's Gambit telling Rogue like, okay, it's time for myself to turn myself in, but not in a way like, okay, you know what? Let the bounty hunters take me away. No, it's him saying it's time for me to go ahead and tell the truth. And so as we dive into issue number 350, we're really getting into that idea of us sitting down and kind of diving into the origin of Gambit here. And this for me is really important, because as we get into the opening pages for Gambit, we see a flashback, a young Gambit who's by this point on the run. He's no longer part of the Thieves Guild, but on top of that as well, he lost his supposed lover. Now, by this point, he's also an enemy of the Kingpin. He's the best thief in the world, but it's also now Gambit being confronted by Mr. Sinister. Now, he had just finished a job for Sinister, but he has another job for him. Now, this begins the whole idea of us learning about Gambit and his connection to one of the worst events, not the like battering thing, but one of the worst times for mutants on the planet Earth, especially for one particular group who lives underground. You'll see here in a moment. But when it comes to Gambit, we learn this flashback that he was paid by Mr. Sinister to do another job, to also recruit different people who belong to a certain group, better known as the Marauders. And that being said right there, you already know where this storyline is most likely going to. But as we do transition back to the present day, we're really getting to that point where it's just Gambit at the moment being transported by the bounty hunters to the person who had technically hired him. Now, for this issue, it's also going to bring in another event we're going to cover very soon on the channel. But with all that being said, when it comes to Gambit, it's him right now being a prisoner. The rest of the X-Men got left behind in the old base of Magneto, but they're not going to quit. Especially when it comes to Rogue, because for Rogue, she wants to get him back. She's still in love with Gambit, but the thing is, she does not know the full story about what's going on with Gambit and what is his origin. Like, what did he do in the past that is just so bad, he's scared to tell anybody at all. But this storyline is finally going to bring in Archangel and Psylocke. Now, we saw them earlier, right? For those two characters, they were kind of on their own dealing with Maggot. But with Psylocke having the Crimson Dawn powers, you also have her being able to teleport. And so we see her begin to teleport But the problem is she really can't control where it goes. But also it's her trying to figure out what is this darkness she felt in Maggot. But with all that going on for Gambit, when he does wake up, he's now in a prison. He's now being talked to by a certain character, but this character is calling Gambit a traitor, somebody who's a traitor to his own people. So of course, we're getting the idea that it's somebody who is very upset with what Gambit did in the past to, again, one of the saddest groups in the mutant race who lives underground. But while you have that going on, we see that for the rest of the X-Men, including Joseph, they're trying their best to locate, Gambit. But the thing is, for Joseph, he begins to feel something. Like something is calling out to him through his powers, his mind, whatever, but it's kind of making him feel a tad bit ill. But you do have our heroes allow Joseph to kind of lead him to where he's being technically dragged to. And so once they do head that location, they find a card that was left behind that belongs to Gambit, but you didn't have Joseph being able to bring up this whole entire fortress out of ground. And for our heroes, they're wondering what is this place and what is its connection to Joseph? Because again, for the X-Men, they believe that Joseph is their past enemy, better known as Magneto. But when they go inside the base, what they see is this statue that stands for justice. And so we're getting the idea of why this storyline is called the Trial of Gambit, because it's really more the idea of Gambit going on trial for the crimes that he had technically committed. Now, for Psylocke, Archangel, and Maggot, they were also teleported over to, this fortress. So for those three characters, they don't know where they're at, but also why they were brought there when it comes to Psylocke powers. Now, for Psylocke, Archangel, and Maggot, they were all separated. And so for Psylocke, it's her trying to figure out where they're at, and the same thing goes for Archangel. But for Maggot, it's a tad bit different, because for Maggot, he does run into, Magneto, Joseph. Now, for Joseph, he does not remember the man at all. But to Maggot, he's kind of no, dude, I know who you are. You and I are technically friends. But then out of nowhere, you have someone knock out Joseph from behind. And for Maggot, he's surprised to see who it actually is. And he can't believe it's that person. But after you have Joseph get taken away, you then have all the different other people get taken away as well when it comes to the X-Men. Trish, Beast, Psylocke, Archangel. Now for Psylocke, just like Maggot, she saw this person who's going around grabbing folks left and right. And she can't believe who she saw. And don't worry, you're going to find out here. And honestly, you see who it is, but then you find out who it truly is at the very end of the storyline. But now we shift over to Gambit and Rogue. Now, when we do, it's really more of Rogue telling Gambit hey, let's go ahead and go. I found you. Let's go ahead and dip out. Let's go ahead and go back home now. But for Gambit, he does not want to leave, because to Gambit, he deserves what's possibly coming for him. He believes that for the crimes that he committed, he should pay. But it's also Gambit begging Rogue to just go ahead and kill him, because for Gambit, he hates the idea of living with the mindset or the thoughts of what he did in the past, just constantly replaying over and over again. Now, while you have the two characters talking, we're then confronted by the person who went through all this to grab Gambit and to bring him here. And that would be Eric the Red. Now, for me personally, this was pretty wild. And the reason why, because for Eric the Red, he was a name that was constantly used for different people when they're trying to pretend to be somebody else. For example, Cyclops. He used the name Eric the Red in the past. And so we're kind of left to wonder in the possibility, is this somebody else right now pretending to be Eric the Red? Now, with the idea that you in the past had Cyclops being Eric the Red, you didn't have Marvel remind us it can't be Cyclops right now pretending to be Eric the Red. Because back in Operation Zero Tolerance, we had learned that when it came to Cyclops, the X-Men discovered that Bastion had basically placed a bomb inside the body of Cyclops. And you have Jean Grey right now using her powers to keep that bomb from killing off her husband. So with that information there, we're told hey, Guys, listen, it's not Cyclops, so ooh, who could be Eric the Red? This is a big mystery. But this leads us back over to the trial of Gambit, because you do have Eric the Red go out of his way to bring all the different X-Men in different position of a courthouse would be like. So for example, you have Archangel right now being the defendant. Now that right there is pretty important. And here's the reason why, because we're going to learn here that for Gambit, he had a major role in the idea of the mutant massacre. Now, when it came to our coverage over the X-Men, it's pretty wild because we really started off with the mutant massacre. I did have a few videos that took place prior to the mutant massacre, but when it came to me sitting down and like doing our coverage over the X-Men, I started at that point right there. The mutant massacre is somewhat beginning to come together finally after like 10 years in Marvel comic timeline, because the mutant massacre took place in 86, 87, and now we're at 98. So 10, 12 years later, you're now finally having some of the pieces of the mutant massacre coming together. But it was Gambit who had a part in the actual massacre. And as we all know, when it came to the mutant massacre, it was the Marauders who went out of their way to kill off legitly most of the Morlocks. Not all of them, but most of them. And so we learned later on that the Marauders were working for Mr. Sinister. But we're also learning here that it was Gambit who also took part in the massacre. Now, it wasn't him going out of his way killing people. No, what he did was he went out of his way, found the different people that Sinister wanted, like Sabretooth, brought them all together and led them down into the actual tunnels of the Morlocks, where, of course, as we all saw, the Marauders killed off most of the Morlocks. Now, the reason why Archangel is so important for this entire storyline, because in the Mutant Massacre, he basically lost his wings. He got severely injured, got his wings cut off after that storyline, met Apocalypse, and was turned into Archangel. And so now you gotta wonder, like, what if Gambit never did lead Marauders into the tunnels of the Morlocks? Would the Mutant Massacre still happen? Would X-Factor get involved? Would Angel turn into Archangel? Let's also not forget that Psylocke knew, because there was a point in time when it came to Gambit, after kissing Rogue, he was in a coma. Psylocke went into his mind and saw the things that we're talking about right now at this present moment. And so for Psylocke, she also knew about what Gambit did, but again, she never told anybody. And so for Archangel, her lover, he's kind of like, how dare you? You knew about this. You didn't tell anybody. You didn't tell me, especially because technically his actions are the reason why I'm the way I am in the present day. Now, again, for her, she went through a lot at that time. But what about Rogue though? Will Rogue actually accept the idea of what she just heard? Now for Rogue, she'd been in the mind of Gambit. She saw what went on in his mind and she knew way back then what he did, but she did not want to accept it. But really, she only got part of the story. And so when you have Eric the Red go out of his way to make Rogue like kiss Gambit, to absorb more of his mind, his past, his memories, she discovers everything that she saw in the past, and what Eric the Red said is true. And it's heartbreaking because that is huge. You are the reason why most of the Morlocks are dead. Now, technically, all he did was lead them, but still, he still had a role in that massacre. And so with all that being said, you now have Gambit wondering where he goes with Rogue. Now, with Rogue kissing Gambit, that means she now has his powers, which also means that she can use his powers as a way to help them all escape. Now, for Eric the Red, it's really more him saying like, yeah, go ahead and leave. Because to him, why should he try to stop them? Because he already has Gambit labeled as a traitor, someone who could no longer be trusted, and most likely the X-Men would no longer go to Gambit for a good while. And technically, That's correct, because here's the thing. After you have the X-Men being able to escape the fortress that was, I guess, built by Eric the Red, you have Rogue tell Gambit, like, you no longer have a home. You're no longer able to come back to the school of Charles Xavier. You're no longer an X-Men. And that is pretty huge. And she flies away. But that's not the ending of the book. Because like I said earlier, Eric the Red is a name that was used in the 1990s, really 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, where you had somebody pretend to be Eric the Red. So for example, Cyclops. But as we saw, it's not Cyclops, right? So who is Eric the Red this time? Well, it will be Magneto. Yes, Magneto, not Joseph. So now we're playing with the idea of, how in the world is there two different Magnetos on Earth at the moment? And also, where has this Magneto been at? If this is the original Magneto, that means this is the one Colossus had right after Avalon was destroyed. And so the question is again, where was this Magneto? And also, what does this mean for the X-Men? And with that being said, guys, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.